So good morning, everybody, and thank you all for showing up once again. It's kind of like we never left. A few housekeeping measures before we start. First, if you were here for the initial informal conference on here, the taking of attendance and who was here and the like of that was pretty tedious. So I'm not going to bother with that. Hopefully people have given me a list of the people who are participating either online or in person. What I will ask is, like last time, some people would come up to speak either to microphone or at the table, is that when you first come up, you identify yourself and with whom you have come. I think that will probably hasten matters when we start discussing the matters that we want to. And also, if you hear weird sounds that sound like they're coming from the roof, they are coming from the roof. We've been having a new roof and chillers put on at the Public Service Commission. It can lead to some alarming and jarring sounds. Thus far, the roof is held. And if you are also here in the late afternoon, sometimes there's a distant rumbling that comes from blasting across the way. The commission has not fallen into a hole despite what many of you may have wished for over time. And also the smells, if there are any odd smells, they are coming probably not from commission staff, but from also the roofers as well. So weird smells, weird noises.
Turn the volume down. I'm on a Zoom call.
Or could be all part of today's experience. And then finally, Commissioner Regan and I have a hard out at 12:30. So it is my intention to probably just press through from 10 o'clock here to 12:30. If there's a necessity for a break, please let me know. We can take a quick break just so we can move on. But otherwise, 12:30 and we will be out. Hopefully that'll suit everybody's schedule. With me today is, of course, Commissioner Regan, and then Chairman Chandler is over at Council's table, and also Ellen Fowler-Gormley, staff attorney, is sitting over there, hiding there. She's assigned to this case as well as taking notes and the like of that. And so that dispenses with any initial topics that I have. Are there anything, before we start in and before the commissioners make their comments, is there anything from you all either in the hearing room or online before we start, any preliminary matters? Okay. There being none, Chairman Chandler, do you have any comments?
Nothing for me.
Okay. Commissioner Regan?
No.
All right, so we will jump in where we were last time. I tried to remember where we left off from the last time, and I think we got through from the initial agenda through a variety of the issues, and I know we're probably going to have to circle back to them, so it's not a hard stop. But are there any issues with insurance, bonding, or contractor issues? Has there been any issues? I know that when some of the tariffs were coming in, that the levels of insurance or bonding that the utilities might require for the contractors that are doing work were objected to, at least in some of the tariffs. Have there been any issues with those? Okay. So then yeah, Chris, come on up.
Yeah, we'll come up. We'll stay here for a little bit. If there's
Sure.
comments that we were gonna make. Sean, you come up as well. Thank you for having Chris Perry, Kentucky Electric Cooperatives.
Thank you.
We appreciate being able to have here. If you're gonna walk through them one by one like that, we'll kind of continue on. But yeah, we did want to make a few brief comments about the contracting and bonding that we're seeing. So Sean, is there anything you wanted to add there initially?
Sure. Sean Knowles with McLean Engineering, in support of the co-ops. Just a little information share for your benefit. As you know, the regulation was very clear in providing sort of the right to require performance bonds. We have interacted with in support of some co-ops trying to retrieve those performance bonds and haven't had a tremendous amount of response. I'm aware of one performance bond that's been provided to a co-op in the state. Just to, obviously, as we work through construction issues, those things are important, and it's a tool that's been provided by the regulation. And so, just wanted to share that information with you, that the cooperatives do appreciate that tool and they're interested in in following up on it and have made some efforts to that end.
Have there been any, I mean, just in general, any contractors that have balked to the requirement and are unable to meet the requirements?
So my understanding of the regulations, those bonds are able to be retrieved from the cooperatives by their attachers. So I don't have much visibility into contractors performing those providing those bonds. I would think the contractors should be providing them to their to the attachers in this case,
Okay.
who they're working for. So I don't have visibility into that.
Okay, and I was just wondering in general, I mean, question to you or to anybody, you know,
Sure.
I guess, do the insurance or the bonding requirements pose any sort of barrier to retention of contractors? I was seeing some shakings of heads, so I'll let the record reflect, such as it is in a formal conference, that nobody seems to have an issue with that. All right, I appreciate your comments. And that being said, is anybody, any other comments on insurance, bonding, or contractor issues? Okay. I'll take the opportunity to put an X on my list. All right, the next issue is unauthorized attachments, and I think LG&E and KU raised this as a specific issue of theirs. Do you all want to come on up, or whoever wants to come up and to discuss this? And if you want to, once again, identify yourself.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Jason Jones with LG&E and KU. I'm the manager of our third-party attachments group. Unauthorized attachments are a concern for us. You know, there's really two things that in this proceeding that we're not wanting to compromise on, and that's safety and reliability. You know, everything else, we're here to help and do what we can do to further this broadband deployment. You know, the unauthorized attachments, they pose a safety risk to the line workers that are not qualified to be working in the power space and are doing so. You got a potential safety risk to the public as it relates to potential clearance issues, potential compromise to our structures, creating potential reliability issues.
You mean overloading?
Yes, sir. Yeah, so when you're attaching, if you're attaching unauthorized, and we haven't been through the pole loading analysis and the engineering to make sure that the attachment is safe, that can be an issue. And I believe the commission noted that in the report on Ike and Ice in 2009, that the third-party attachments may have contributed to some of the issues that we saw there. In addition, we can create situations like double wood. I think we've seen this where an attacher attaches to one pole that's scheduled to be replaced, but they attach unauthorized before the replacement occurs. We go out, we replace the pole, but the attacher is on the old pole at that point. And so then we've got two poles side by side. You can probably ride around just about any town and see that. This is not a theoretical situation. We've used Scott County, I think, as an example many times in the last proceeding, and there were specific questions around that. We saw at least 14 separate occasions with unauthorized attachments in Scott County. Some of them creating potentially dangerous situations. One in particular on a transmission line where they were 27 inches away from our facilities. Minimum distance, depending upon the voltage, you know, minimum distance from the distribution lines, 48 inches. So certainly working in an unsafe manner. The other thing that I think ties closely to this are the temporary attachments. Because really what the temporary attachments are is they're just a euphemism for unauthorized attachment. If they haven't been through the process, they have not been engineered properly, you haven't been given clearance to attach, that temporary attachment is an unauthorized attachment and has the potential to create these unsafe working conditions and potential reliability issues.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with just unauthorized attachments and holistically.
Yes, sir.
And any of the other poll owners, feel free to jump in or hop on up here. But, in what context are you discovering unauthorized attachments? Are they fairly new with regard to, say, to the broadband rollout? Or is it you're going through and you're finally taking a look at your polls maybe a little bit closer when you're taking that survey, and you're saying, oh, here's an unauthorized attachment, and it could have been there for a while? What,
Right.
is it one, the other, or both?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. So we do find some from time to time when we do surveys, but what we've seen most recently have been our construction employees reporting back to us that they've gone to the field to do make-ready and that somebody's already attached unauthorized. So that's what we've seen most recently.
Okay, and then, do you know whether or not that in those situations where somebody goes out to make the make-ready work, the unauthorized attachment, has it been the case that those attachers are those that have already applied to attach?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, all right. And you may not be the one to speak to this, but with regard to just inspection of polls, take a step back, not make ready, not the
right.
survey, but I can't remember what the cycle is. When you have to,
Every 2 years, we do an overhead inspection.
overhead
So we-
inspection, does that also take into account poll attachments? I mean, before you answer, I qualify that, is not just poll attachments, does everything look like it's attached correctly, but does it also say, does LGD and KU, do they have the knowledge to say who should be attached to that poll in their normal inspection procedure?
No, we do not inspect that every 2 years. We have a separate inspection program by which we do what we refer to more as an audit than an inspection.
Okay,
And we do those on a periodic basis. They're not the same regular 2-year cycle. But we do perform audits on poll attachments.
okay. And then, so if an authorized attachment is discovered, what is the procedure for the utility?
Yeah, at that point, we would provide notice to the attacher that they were attached unauthorized. We have the authority and the regulation, if you will, to impose a penalty. We have not often done that. We've generally tried to work with the attachers. In the last rulemaking proceeding, this was a little bit of a back and forth where we had actually asked for that penalty to be raised. Ultimately, it was not, with the justification that we had not really invoked the existing penalty, so how did we know that it was insufficient? So we have recently begun to impose those penalties. And we had since the last informal conference, we had the opportunity to execute a third party, a high volume plan with one of our attachers. And in that high volume plan, we had,
Yeah.
You can tell them why, but I'm gonna stop.
All right, if you're on the call,
No,
if
no,
you're,
that's not why. The high volume plan, we can't talk about a high volume plan, it's a pending tariff.
oh,
subject to
okay.
commission review.
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't,
Nothing about the high volume plan.
okay, I didn't realize that was an issue.
yeah,
So
it still
thank
has,
you.
it's still pending before the commission. So I had two things to take care of in housekeeping matters. The first one was, if you're online, please mute your microphones. And the second is that it is, the high-volume contract between LG and KU and Charter is pending before the commission. It has not been ruled on yet. So
Yes.
we can't discuss that matter.
Okay.
Before us. So hope, we'll
I mean,
see.
Well, just let's clarify, it got filed through the tariff filing system, so I presume the anticipation is that the request is that the commission either let it go into effect or approve it, is that?
That's right.
So.
Yes, sir, that's the request.
Okay.
Yeah, so, but, I guess one of the things that I would ask about would be, one, the form of notice for unauthorized attachment. How is an authorized attacher notified?
Yeah, so there's two methods. we make the note of it in Catapult, the online portal system that we use, and then we follow that up with a email notification. We did just recently, this morning, in talking with one of the attachers, find out that they weren't receiving some of those email notifications because of the size of the attachments that were attached to it, all the photos. So we did find a bug in the system this morning, so.
Let me ask a clarifying question just for a second. As a general matter, our regulations require, so the commission has jurisdiction over utilities. Okay. Don't necessarily have jurisdiction over attachers, like as an entity, but we do, of course, have jurisdiction over the attachment to the poles, because the poles are owned by people we do regulate. Okay. So just under that framework. The poles, under our regulations, have requirements that the poles are identified. So the little 1-inch, yellow back, black lettering on KU poles have assume an identifying number. It's yours, it says KU on it, somebody can call in and say the pole number. Assume you all know where it is. As a general matter, how does anyone know, and true ignorance here, when you go and look at something that is attached in the communication space, how do you know if there are 5 attachments there or 2 attachments there, who owns that attachment?
No, that's a good question. And oftentimes we have difficulty figuring that out. But oftentimes there's also tags. So it varies widely by area and by attacher. I will say that the newer attachments have done a pretty good job of tagging those. I think what we've seen
So outside
recently.
of LG and KU, is that the same general answer for Kentucky Power and for the co-ops? Okay. So,
Chairman, I'm sorry, this is Jeremy Gibson with Duke Energy. We inventory our poles every 5 years to see who's attached. So I don't know if that answers your question. We try and keep an updated record of those every 5 years.
no, that does help, because we're gonna get into inventory, I think, at some point. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
So you show up, for whatever reason, a car hits, somebody has an accident, car hits a pole will get snapped. You go out, you go, hey, look, there's 4 attachments on here. We knew of 3 of them, one of them may be marked, may not be marked, whatever. In terms of, just as a general matter, because we've gotten some informal letters over the years, maybe being copied on demand letters to certain unauthorized attachers and things like that. Of the unauthorized attachments over the last couple of years that utilities run up, find out about, whatever it is, through whatever circumstances you find out about an unauthorized attachment, what percentage roughly, just order of magnitude, are an attacher that you have a relationship with, somebody that's already an attacher that is paying a bill, and this is just, one pole, but they're paying for all the other ones, whatever it may be, versus somebody who is not paying at all and has gone out and, attached to 25 poles, but you have no relationship at all. Like, they're not currently paying any pole attachment rates. What's the sort of general breakdown that you all see?
Yeah, I would say that it's primarily the former, not the latter. We do not see very often at all, I don't think, jump in here, John, if I'm wrong, but I don't think that we see very often just some random new attacher that we had no relationship with. It's almost always someone who's known.
I'd say similar experience with the co-ops. It's typically someone there's a relationship with.
Because the only, and Mr. Penny, correct me if I'm wrong, the only things that we've gotten over the last couple of years have been where it's like they don't know who they are, and they end up making a demand letter, because I assume at that point, it doesn't get to that point where they're having to send demand letters. If it's somebody you already have a relationship with, you just kind of send a bill to and say, how long have you been on this pole? Please remit payment for the time you've been on the pole. Is that generally how it happens? If you run across somebody that's already paying a rate otherwise?
I'd say typically if there's a relationship, then you start with the relationship to try to work it out, right? And if you don't have a contract or any type of basis for the relationship, then that's probably when.
Okay. So real world instances, real fast. how many times have you all run up on, and maybe just generally the last 2 years, that you all can think of, or if you all want to like send in this information, run up on a unauthorized attachment that you subsequently determine exceeds the communication space, like the actual space in the communications, when I guess maybe this is technically the same thing, but would have otherwise been denied because of a loading analysis would indicate that it can't take that attachment.
Yeah, we'll have to follow back up with you. I mean, I don't have that off the top of my head, but I'm happy to get that information.
Because there's really
Yeah.
two, as I see it, there are two big issues here. Either A, somebody's attached and they're not paying the rate. That's, you know, we've got people not paying electric rates and water rates and stuff all over the state. So like that's not a new one. That's not something that can't be taken care of. But the second being, and related to how long has that been, and I know that's related. But the second is, and it's causing an additional issue other than we're just not being paid for it, which is a safety issue or a loading analysis otherwise would have said you can't connect to that pole, we need a new pole. Those are like two distinct issues. I see the rate thing as being not complicated enough to where we would need to have these meetings. Let's just put that in like let's try to categorize the things that are complicated enough that necessitate these meetings. So if you all could give us some indication in the future of how many of the unauthorized attachments you guys are running up on that are actually causing, like, that would not have otherwise been approved to attach would be very helpful in appreciating the magnitude of the situation to date. Not to say that we don't need to have this conversation about things going forward. So, Mr. Penny, that's all.
The one thing that I would add to that is, you know, in 2021, 2022, we were seeing hundreds of polls per year. And now, you know, being applied to for attachment. And now we're talking tens of thousands. So I think that those numbers may not be indicative of the problem that you may see today. If we're telling you, hey, you know, when we were getting a couple of hundred attachments per year, we were seeing this many, now we are getting tens of thousands attachments per year. I think we're gonna see more of that today, and the problem may be exacerbated today because of the amount of work and the speed at which it's being done.
So I guess I don't understand. Are you saying that you expect more people will attach in an unauthorized nature, or are you saying you will see more unauthorized attachments because you are actively looking at your polls more than you did?
I would say those two things are not mutually exclusive. It might be both, but I think just the nature and speed of the work is inviting this to happen. I think that's what we've seen thus far.
Duke would agree with that. And I can, I'm going to speak to some other areas where this, because the scale of permits we're receiving in Kentucky is not to the scale of other areas, but we are actively seeing attachers send in permits, and then we go out there and they're already on the polls and in violation to power. Not necessarily an overloading issue, but we found them in instances encroaching within 12 inches to the lowest power point. And it's a mixture of all the attachers that we work with.
So, and just so I'm clear, what we're talking about, within 12 inches of the electric space is an objective violation of the NESC. So what we're talking about with loading is it's sometimes a violation of the NESC, and it's also not a violation of the NESC, but it's a violation of the utilities. Oh, well, I say violation, that's hard to. Not in compliance with the utilities, that still argues that it's the law. Not in line, I'll go back to how I prefer to talk. Not in line with the utilities' own internal planning criteria, right? Okay.
And Chairman, if I could,
Well,
excuse me, just add a little bit of nuance. Again, it's John LaFollette with LG&E and KU. I wanted to add a bit of nuance to the comment that you made a few moments ago, putting the types of unauthorized attachments into two categories. The type of unauthorized attachment that LG&E and KU is most concerned about is the category where a clearance violation is being created by that attachment. That's not always the same thing as saying that an attachment would not have been permitted. What we're seeing most frequently now is, in the course of performing power space make-ready, LG&E and KU crews are identifying unauthorized attachments that have been made during the course of the application process, but before necessary power space make-ready has been completed. So it's
What is, tell me, let's just use common, power space make ready is moving the electric lines away from the communication space?
yes, sir, or replacing a pole in
Or
order
replacing
to
a pole.
create space for the attachment to be made safely. And so when an attachment is made prior to the completion of that power space make-ready, it, by definition, creates an NESC violation and a violation of LG&E and KU's construction standards.
So just.
And it's unsafe.
I just want to make sure I understand the first part of what you're saying. In your all's opinion, and I know you're not probably speaking on behalf of the company, but what you're saying is effectively, if you're prioritizing the risks as you all see them from unauthorized attachments, the first one is proximity to electric space, and then that's followed by exceeding loading requirements, at least marginally or not significantly exceeding loading requirements. Is that effectively what you're saying, that you're more worried about the location, the proximity to the electric space than you are necessarily the loading requirements?
Yes, that's fair.
Yeah, because that's the safety concern right there, right? Somebody's working in that power space, somebody's gonna get hurt eventually. You can only get away with this for so long.
Yeah. Chairman, that was my comments the last time I was here, the tripling of communications contractors' contacts.
Right.
And when it's, and we are seeing unauthorized attachments, but it's not a problem that's just now. We have some cooperatives that have went out and done those audits and found thousands of unauthorized attachments years ago. So that is not just a new phenomenon. We are concerned about that, but loading on poles, I think we're creating tremendous risk if we don't do the engineering and the analysis, and weather events, ice storm loading comes up, that can always be a challenge to reliability as we go forward. If you go back to the Ike and Ice report, that's certainly, we lived through that, and that was a challenge. And we found it many times, tensions, guy installations were all challenges, especially in the rural areas.
Okay, so I want to ask a clarifying question when you talk about electric space make-ready work. If that's, so just when it's determined that electric space make-ready work is necessary, it means that you said it either needs a new pole, because there's no space, or it's a moving of the electric to create space. So if there's not electric make-ready work, then it means that, then I guess there's sufficient space on the pole at the time. If it's not, if electric space make-ready work is not required, then there's sufficient space on the pole.
Not in every case.
Okay.
Excuse me. So in many cases, only communication space make-ready would be necessary
Right.
in order to accommodate that new attachment.
Well, there would be space. I guess there's space within the communication thing as long as things can be moved around.
Yes.
Okay, all right. And then one thing, this is a housekeeping measure, I forgot to mention that the Vice Chairman Hatton is also participating, but virtually. So you've got the entire commission today, so thank you very much. All right, do any of the other poll owners have anything to say? Because I'm going to talk I want to ask questions to the attachers for a second, and then I'm just going to give you a fair warning. The agenda, we'll just skip a few of these things and come back to them, and we'll go to temporary attachments and conditional licenses. I think that it looks like it's kind of inextricable from the unauthorized attachment. So,
Can I,
Yeah.
while everybody's giving responses, Mr. Gibson thankfully gave us his response for Duke. Mr. Perry was talking about the Ike and Ice report. One of the recommendations was about regular audits and inspections of poles. Of course, there's the minimum requirements depending on voltage and our regulations, 2 years, 6 years from the ground. Looking at deterioration, the 2 years, of course, does not speak at all to that pole audit. Our pole attachment regulations requires at least that first audit and has a lot about audits. But going back to the poll, the Ike and Ice in 2009, we said people should have periodic, I pulled it up here because I didn't want to misspeak, but regular audits and inspections of pole routes to ensure continued compliance with applicable standards, including evaluations of structure loadings and facility clearances. And I'm just curious what, I don't know that we set a standard or a minimum requirement. So what has been the practice for those audits and inspections of poles for compliance with applicable standards?
So just from the cooperative's perspective, I would say, industry standard is probably 5 years, and that's what's typical. I would say there's a wide variety of people on that cycle. Some are really good about doing it every 5 years, and some don't do it nearly as frequently as that.
Does pole audits fall in the category of vegetation management, that it's one of those things that it's a little bit flexible with, and you can give and take any given year, and over and under, and speed it up then, and slow it down now when you have the people to do it? Is that?
It's a challenge, and the methodology is different for different cooperatives. Many of them will get communication with the contractors or communications companies and do it together, trying to make sure everybody knows, and when you do the counts, that it's consistent, everybody knows what's what. So it's logistics as well as methodologies different all across the cooperatives.
It becomes a cost issue.
Yeah. And it's-
So LG&E and KU performs the pole attachment audit on a 5-year cycle. Our most recent one was completed in 2020.
I assume everybody's gonna be doing, or in the process of one recently, right, following the pole attachment regulations? Any different, Kentucky Power?
Pam Ellis for Kentucky Power. We do a 5-year also, but we are typically doing 20% of our territory every year.
I got you, okay. 5-year rolling, basically.
5-year rolling, everybody on the pole in a given area.
And then, so with that, I don't know if Windstream or AT&T want to comment, but now that you're going to move to ask the attachers some questions, I just ask if they also indicate as part of their responses whether they think certain audits are, to Mr. Perry's point, the differences or distinctions between the audits are better or worse, easier, I don't know, just curious what their perspectives of individual different types of audits, given that everybody's doing it a little differently.
Anybody from AT&T or Windstream want to chime in on their pole audit methodology or procedures? All right. So, attachers, would you all like to speak to some of these issues, please?
Absolutely. So I'm Heather Day with Charter Spectrum. And so to follow up from what, KU and the teams have said is we are also 100% in line from a safety reliability perspective, right? So we take them very seriously. We take them back with our teams. We want to ensure that we then make any attachments. If we're in the communication space, right, we'll do that move within ourselves. If we are within the power space, we will coordinate that with the power company. I think as KU indicated, we've got a gap in how we receive those unauthorized notifications, right? Some transpire through email. Some of those emails may or may not come through. So I think we have a holistic opportunity both with whether it's co-ops, KU, or all of our entities, right, of how we have that regular dialogue, how we receive those unauthorized attachment concerns, and then on our end, how we ensure that we've got that corrected and we follow back up, right? So we've got a high volume of polls that we're attaching to and looking to permit on a regular basis. And so we want to make sure that we stay most current as well with all of those attachment concerns.
Do you send an email to an individual, or is there an email box, or is it going, where is the email going?
So
or
the
how do you
one,
receive
yes, so thank you, Commissioner. The one that was spoken of this morning was kind of in a response to a specific build-out meeting So it was a reply to that meeting with those 14 attachment concerns. Unfortunately, due to size, we hadn't received it. We had conversation and dialogue and follow-up on those 14 this morning, and even after Test sending that email again, we didn't receive it. So we've got some work to do just in a partnership perspective to ensure that we've got good systems on both sides in play to receive those things regularly so that we can act on them and then speak to them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That was an unknown issue that was going on, and we sorted it out just talking here this morning, so.
I just want to congratulate us on helping you all find a solution to a problem.
Appreciate you bringing us together.
Yeah, I wonder why we brought you all here together. I think this is the evidence of it. All right. Well, can you speak to, without admitting that there's been any unauthorized attachments, just like in general, how it may occur from your perspective?
I think, one, as far as, like, we had an instance even within the last couple of weeks where we had an email for a permit that said we were good to go, but hadn't received it in writing. So we went ahead and attached, and then were identified to say we weren't actually, the email was a mistake, right? So that's one mechanism, right, of just kind of that, the systems and the infrastructure between all groups, right? We all use different systems, we have different clocks, so to speak, right? And so that creates confusion. And then candidly, a human error, right, is going to make a mistake. And so that's where we want to know, when we get that poll information, who was it? We can go back to understand who conducted that part of the build for us, right? And then we can go back within those teams and then hold them accountable, right? That's our goal from a people perspective.
Sorry, the commission doesn't have jurisdiction over the attachers. The chairman's already talked about that. So, whatever your internal policies are to monitor this, and I'm saying you all because you volunteered to sit at the table. There are other attachers I know writ large across the state, but y'all are here. So, I mean, is it one of those things? One of the reasons for bringing these conferences is to talk about lessons learned. And so, I know probably the utilities are refining their procedures. It's the same thing with charter.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, and I think it's akin to even the invoicing conversation, right, we had at our last hearing, is that we have opportunity just within the infrastructure and the communications between the teams, right, how we all operationalize the growth, right, of the volume of what we're doing as we connect Kentucky. And so those are things we're committed to working on operationally with all the poll owners.
Okay, all right. I'm not sure how to do the segue, but let's go ahead and start talking about temporary attachments and conditional license, because I think that's, not without putting too many words into your all's mouths, LG and KU, but you would consider an unauthorized attachment for one when there's been no authorization.
Correct.
And I believe that a conditional license or temporary attachment, if the proposal from the KBCA was something along the lines of if the survey's been done, but I guess there's been no final authorization. In one scenario, there could be an attachment where there's been in places where no make-ready work has been necessary has been identified. Is that correct? So what are the other scenarios in which there would be a temporary attachment or conditional license? I guess I'm looking at the ones that proposed it.
I think from our perspective, what we're
Would you
looking for.
identify yourself?
Oh, sorry, Tracy Gifford with Spectrum Charter. I think from our perspective, what we're looking for is not to attach to poles that require make-ready, but to be able to start to build, so when you submit an application, it's literally hundreds, maybe now thousands of poles. And so many of those poles don't require make-ready other than in the comm space. And so to allow us to start construction on those poles, while we're waiting for the make-ready to be completed, whether it be a pole replacement or a power space change or rearrangement.
So you're talking, the survey, you start doing the work while the survey has already been completed.
Correct.
Okay, so, all right, but then, like, taking a step back, you submit an order, and it's 500 poles. Can you start to build out while make-ready work's being done down the line. Let's assume that it's just, we're going linearly, it's flat, and it's, you
We
know,
would like to.
and then LG and NKU or other pole owners, in that scenario, is a project able to go forth while make-ready work's being done, maybe on the tail end? Let's just assume you're doing it on a linear. Is the project able to start, or do you have to wait?
Yeah, good question. And it depends on how the applications are broken up. So if a survey is done and they know there's gonna be make-ready on these 10 poles out of the 500, then, you know, you could submit the 490 in one application, the 10 in the other application, or break it up in some manner, in which the ones that don't have the make-ready required, won't be held up. We do hold up by, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, clarifying question, but I understood from the last meeting we had that how you all look at it in Catapult is if it's the same applicant, it's the same application.
An applicant,
You all take it serially in terms of polls historically. So how do you all delineate if it's just a long queue, as long as it's the same applicant, it's the same project or the same application? How are you all internally delineating between if an applicant put in 490 and immediately behind it put in 10, how do you all know that those are separately two applications if you're treating them all as one application or one project?
well, so so just to be clear, we treat, or we work it by application, so not by attacher. So an attacher has many applications. And, you know, we work those, like you said, linearly, as they're submitted, unless that attacher asks us to reprioritize. So we allow the attacher to reprioritize within their own list, but not in relationship to other attachers, if that makes sense. We treat all the attachers the same. As the stuff comes in, we will work it in the order it comes in. But if an attacher wants us to work application 2 for them instead of application 1, we will do that. Did that answer your question, what you were trying to get to?
Well, maybe. Hold on one second. I'm sorry. You all, in the last, we were talking about the last one, you all were the 1,000 was delineated by applicant, not by application or project, right?
Yes. Well,
But in
which-
terms of how you study, I understand serially across applicants, but how you study an applicant's own queue of 300, 500,000, whatever many polls they have in the queue, you all look at that as being just a single project or a single application in terms of delineate between the 300 or the 1,000, what I thought I heard the other day. But then now you're saying when you study it, you actually see distinctions between individual applications or individual areas.
yes, the latter is correct. So if we gave the impression that was not what we were doing in the last informal conference, I apologize for that. But we have the applicant, and that applicant has multiple applications. And within any single application, you may have one or many polls. And those can be divided up in any way. So we do hold up an entire application if make-ready is required for that application. So we work it at the application level.
Okay, let me ask a clarifying question to Charter. Basically, what they were saying, I'll let you get back to what you were saying, sorry, but
No,
if you have 100 poles in an application, and they're down a flat road, and, let's just make it easy, 97 of them, following the survey, don't make ready necessary, simple, whatever, they're not complex make ready. 3, right in the middle, let's just call them 51, 52, 53, all require the pole be replaced. So what you were talking about is you were maybe after the survey's done, we can go ahead and start constructing on the ones that don't need complex make ready. Go ahead and get started, waiting for them to do the 3. I don't know how long it'd take to do 100 poles in a row down a single road, but what does that look like in the sense of how do you start working on it if the three in the middle have to be removed? What are you all envisioning?
So with it, I mean, that would obviously be a stop, right? We would not be able to build past those three poles. Unless it happens to be corner poles. I mean, there are situations, but in general, it's not 50 or 100 poles. I mean, that was kind of what brought us here originally, was it's thousands of poles, right?
Yeah, I get that. So if a single application has poles that require make-ready, complex make-ready, how are you, are you talking about you have a road of 50, an application of 1,000, and a road that has 50 poles down? None of those require complex make-ready. What you would like to do after the survey is just do at least that road, but any run that includes complex, you all wouldn't necessarily start touching until the make-ready is done. Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
You wouldn't start on that 100 row because three in the middle are gonna get replaced.
I mean,
as a general matter, I'm not.
Yeah, as a general rule, that's probably true. I mean, it depends on where the poles are, how they're situated. If there's a good stop point, we might be able to build right to that one pole that requires make-ready and stop, right, if that happens to be a dead-end pole.
We would like to work until we can't, basically,
Yeah.
right? Scenario-based. And so I think the opportunity is that even if they're on the same permit, because we don't have the pole owner's engineering back, right, to dedicate or detail those that fall into the complex space, right, that we can't necessarily identify that pre-permit submission,
So-
right, other than our
Yeah, so
own engineer.
let me just ask a question that I do want to hear from Kentucky Power. Would a simple solution to this be, and I'm gonna overuse this word because of my, lack of vocabulary. Would a simple solution to this be that in applications, you all have an idea of where these poles are, right? If you're using AEP's technology, you're literally taking a tool, as I understand it, and running along and choosing the routes that you would like to run. You all know where the runs are, right? Is there a way for you all to sub-delineate the larger applications into smaller, more narrow areas so that if, let's just take a LG&E KU, that they do 1,000 pole run and they have 30 poles that require complex make-ready, but there are entire runs that don't require significant make-ready following the survey, they could arguably, like, I don't know, I'm just like, give an initial permit, go ahead and attach to those that don't require any make-ready at all after we've done our survey. Let us be working on these. That way it's not all or nothing. So
Is it all or nothing today, though?
Yes.
Yeah. So if there's one pole in the application that needs to be complex make-ready, you don't work on it?
No.
Okay.
Chairman, this is Jeremy Gibson with Duke Energy. Like to weigh in on a couple of things with this topic, if that's all right.
yeah, one second. We have somebody from Kentucky Power that'd like to go first, and then I'll.
Sure.
Pam Ellis, Kentucky Power. So our system does that. If you submit 1,000 poles at one time, we break it into 50 pole increments so that we're dealing with 50 poles at a time. And again, like you suggested, you pick the poles in a line, so it's going to break them up in 50 pole segments linearly, how you put them into the application. But again, we're not going to approve onesie twosies. We're going to do it in 50 pole increments. And because it could be pole 1 and pole 8 and pole 25, it makes no sense to only approve those that have no make-ready, because you're going to have to skip poles anyway. So that's the only piece I wanted to add.
And you're not gonna, because of loading issues, you're not gonna connect to this one and connect to this one, and you can't just leave it.
You can't leave it hanging,
Yeah.
correct?
And if I might, our system works the same way, only instead of the 50 poles, our limit is a 100.
You
And
can't go smaller than 100 is what
you
you're
can't go larger than 100. The same way you can't go larger than 50
saying.
with what Kentucky Power just described. And you go in, you select the poles, you select the route, and
But I'm just making up, if 1,000 pole application comes in and we'll call them tranches, there are 10 100 pole tranches, you guys aren't saying if there's no complex make ready in tranche 0 to 100 and 101 to 200, but there are complex make ready in the other 800, within the 100 pole tranches, you guys aren't going, hey, following survey, you can start working on the first 200 poles.
You
That's not
absolutely
how
can. We release
You
those.
are today.
Yes, we release
saying
those.
So there's a distinction between Kentucky Power System and ours in that our system doesn't automatically break up large application submittals into smaller tranches.
It doesn't, or it's unable
It
to.
does not.
Sorry, it doesn't, or it's unable to.
I would have to ask.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not a feature of it that I'm familiar with.
But the max is a 100, I guess is what I was trying to say. So you're not going to have a 1,000 pole run with one pole holding everything up.
Mr. Gibson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So yeah, we limit our applications to 40 poles. Anything over that one, it bogs down our system, but two, it makes it easier to manage like you're mentioning. So where we do ours a little bit differently. So if you have a 40 pole route, and let's say the scenario that you use, one pole in the middle requires make ready, we send the approval back once the route is designed and everything, and they've agreed to pay for the make ready on that pole. We actually tell them to go forth and build on the poles that have just communication make ready. There's nothing else. Go ahead and build on those, but you can't go any further until you hit that one pole where you hit that make ready pole. And this actually kind of ties back into what I think most of the communication companies, and I'm using my thoughts here, this is typically where I feel like the communication companies want to use that temporary attachment on a pole that has make ready because it might be holding up the rest of that route. And that's where we try and explain to them that you can't temporary attachment on a pole that has make ready because you're not going to prevent, you're going to just create and make the situation worse. So that's typically what we've seen requested from attachers is, hey, we want a temporary attach on this one pole in the middle of the route that requires make ready because we can't do the whole thing at one time. So when we approve that job, we actually tell them, go build on the poles you can build on. Absolutely. Those are approved, but the make ready one has to be completed before you can attach to it. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there and see if that answers some questions on things we've seen. Let me say that.
Yeah, I was just going to add that typically, the cooperatives we work with will approve attachment requests in sections. So typically, you're going to break it up into a smaller, reasonable amount. But if they get an application for 300 poles, they're not going to hold 300 poles until they're all done. Right? They'll break it up into sections and approve 6 sections one at a time.
So, one thing that is still not clear to me, the interaction and how this works in practice, is let's say the applicant, the attacher, does its own survey. They take it to the utility. Utility says, we think it's a terrible survey. We're going to do our own survey. Utility does their own survey. Survey comes. It doesn't matter what the survey comes back at. The survey comes back, and there's at least, let's just call it, one pole that requires complex make ready. It's a full pole replacement. It's a 40-foot pole, and it needs to be a 45-foot pole. Like, that's a thing that can happen, right? We all agree. Okay, so great. Scenario could be, it needs to be a 45-foot pole. Is there either allowable today, happening today? I want to appreciate the characterization of this. Is it possible for the attacher to engage with pre-approved or the utilities actual contractors, whatever it may be, engage with folks who are able to deal with the electric space? Like, pick a contractor, they're your favorite contractor, that's the people we're talking about, that they are allowed to engage in the communication space. That is it able to happen, actually happening, feasible to happen, whatever phrase you all want to use that contractor to do the complex make ready effectively yourself once the survey has been completed. Effectively a self-help remedy by the attacher.
My impression, you guys correct me if you disagree, but my understanding from the regulation is that complex make-ready, pole replacement's complex make-ready, and that can't be done by self-help, is my understanding.
We are looking at an approach much like that with one of the RECCs in Kentucky today, where we would use their power contractor to do our comms, and we would be able to issue both the complex make-ready to that contractor and our design, and then the contractor would start immediately
So
after
it's-
paying the invoice.
So it's basically, I just wanna make sure I have an appreciation for what conceptually you're talking about. Basically, the utility is doing the work with the same people they would have hired to do the work anyway.
Right.
They're just doing it at your direction and with the company's approval.
So in this case, they will actually issue their power design to the contractor, and we'll issue our comms design to the contractor.
And you
they
guys
will-
are
they will
paying.
do both.
That's what I
And
wanna
they'll
make.
do both,
and you
right?
guys-
But
Okay, all right.
You get the benefit of both happening simultaneously.
Not two different groups of people trying
Right.
to.
And the power company is still paying for the power make-ready. We pay that invoice, and then they pay the contractor for the power space,
Okay.
and we pay for the comm space. So it's not a true self-help, but it's very similar to what you were saying.
So that's an approved contractor, right?
Correct.
Which is allowed in the regulation.
So my only issue is approved contractor who works on our property versus approved contractor who would bring in a crew from somewhere else that has not worked on our property. Because in a self-help situation, an approved contractor crew that is currently on our property would not be available for a self-help. It would have to be approved contractor bringing in another crew that we don't already have engaged, who may not be aware of our practices, would have to have oversight, would have to have additional internal, like I said, internal oversight because they wouldn't be used to the normal practices.
You wouldn't have done like a,
We would do an onboarding for them, but again, that would be because it's a crew that's not normally under our control, and we would have to have inspectors and others keeping an eye on them as well. So it would, essentially, it could add to the cost. Because we don't have the available contractors on the property. They're already doing other things, customer service, what have you, that we could pull off to do this make-ready specifically for self-help. Does that make sense?
it does. I just wanna get back, make sure I have an appreciation. All this is in large part about timing.
Right.
Is that right? It's not, resource availability. I mean, is it about resource is it can't
It's-
get the contractors out, can't get the poles?
Yes.
Which I haven't heard can't get the poles, but in terms of resources, it's some resources and that's affecting timing.
Correct. It's engineering resources to get the engineering surveys completed, and it's also contract resources because it's a different training mechanism, it's a different level of training, it's a different cost for an electrically qualified contractor versus a communications qualified contractor. And even if you found a contractor that has both an electric arm and a telecommunications arm, it's still going to be two different people in the field probably.
And I would like to throw in on top of this, Chairman, if I could, Jeremy with Duke. I mean,
Sorry,
again,
Mr.
we're just
Gibson, could you
talking
speak
about-
up just a little bit?
Yes, my apologies. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I mean, I know we're talking specifically about self-help utilizing a contractor, but there's many other issues that I foresee that could cause problems for the utility company when you're changing out a pole. You have potential outages, customer notifications, permits that are required. There's a whole process that the communication companies don't necessarily know, and how are they going to be able to utilize self-help for a pole change out when those scenarios arise? Because they don't know our customers, they don't have their contact information, they don't know the process around that whole pole change out. It's more than just going out there and popping a new pole in the ground and moving on our merry way. So I think that's on top of what Pam is saying. There's multiple issues that are tied to this self-help thing.
How long does it how long does it, I genuinely don't know this. How long does it take to replace a pole, like, with, I don't know, a three-phase three-phase pole, no additional, no rock, no, like, how long, is it an hour that that you're moving it over? Is it a half a day?
4 to 6 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you've also got the permitting, I mean, if there's local permits that are needed, railroad crossing permits, which can take forever, all those other things as well.
Yeah, there's plenty of work to do to get to that one day of replacing the pole.
And in terms of complex make-ready, what proportion of that are we talking about being an actual pole replacement?
I would have to
Is
look.
that, I mean, is it, can we just say as a general matter it's synonymous these days? Or are there a lot of times where it's just moving the electric space up and not using a different pole and not replacing it?
I would say in Kentucky Power's experience, more of it is replacing the pole than just rearranging in the electric space.
Same with Duke Energy.
In rural systems, and I know we're building in some that are kind of suburban, but you'll see that a lot. You know, we used to build at a height and a pole class that was lower, so you're going across even a field, and they're gonna be poles that probably many of them are gonna have to be changed. So it is very specific to each location, but I'd say there's a significant number that are being pole change outs.
Yeah, so like, that's why I wanna make sure, when you get the survey back and it says complex make-ready, it is falls into the, when it means complex make-ready in the regulation, in at least the majority of the time, that means pole replacement. Is that?
From our perspective, yes.
I would say majority, but not all. I mean, if I had to put a percentage on it blindly here, don't hold me to this, but I'd say maybe 60-40 or something like that.
Well, the reason I ask is that I just don't want us to, for the sake of being on the same page, that we're not thinking that complex make-ready is the same, and that you get a survey back and the thing that keeps you from getting the permit is complex make-ready, you go, oh, well, the poles need to be replaced. That's not necessarily the case. Not all complex make-ready is exactly the same.
Correct.
Okay.
And I did have one more thing before we move away totally from the temporary attachment. One of the options we also wanted to be able to use was when it requires, other than maybe a pole replacement, or where we can encroach in the comm space, where instead of being a foot above the other comms, we could maybe go 4 inches until the pole is replaced. We would like to have the ability to look at those types of options as well. There's cases where we could avoid encroaching on the power space with a standoff arm. All those should be looked at as possible options.
Kentucky Power
Standoff
objects to
arms
that.
don't, yeah, standoff arms don't clear code violations to power.
They-
It's not, Pam, you want to speak?
Yeah,
on it?
so Kentucky Power, and sounds like Duke also disagree with that. From my perspective, it's a climbing issue. We still have linemen that climb poles, and it's really difficult when you've only got 4 inches between an attacher, plus it doesn't meet code. So you can't put up, I mean, it becomes unauthorized, and if you're gonna put an arm or a bracket out, it's gonna inhibit climbing as well. It's a safety issue.
When you say it doesn't meet code, I mean, they can't do something that doesn't meet code. So where's
So going within 4 inches of another attacher, it means it does not meet the NESC. NESC says a foot between.
just so, I just want to make sure, I mean.
Am I wrong?
No,
Okay.
we often, and it's usually because we only have the benefit of asking, not saying anything, and only asking questions to people, understand in a very direct way. But I don't want to talk past each other and then us not have an appreciation for the entirety of the issue or what everybody else is saying. So what, you all, I would assume are not just going, we would like to violate code. So like,
No.
just give us more color on what
No,
it is
so-
exactly you're saying.
I believe this should only be used when we're past the timelines for completing the make-ready. And 2, when it's only a temporary attachment while we're waiting for them to replace the pole or do the power make-ready.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. You're saying that you all think that this mechanism arm, whatever, this type of thing, can be done without it running afoul of the NESC?
I don't know that I'm willing to say that.
Okay. What are those types of, are these like, what we run into with, meter jumps, where they're illegal, but people sell them at the, at the store? What are the types of mechanisms that you're talking about used or otherwise?
They're, I mean, if you drive around Kentucky, you'll see bracket arms today with plan on them.
I guess what I'm trying to say, when, like, what's the, like, the functional use of them in accordance with the NESC on an ordinary basis, not what we're talking about this
To
exactly?
create the 48 inches that they're talking about from power.
That's where Duke Energy disagrees, because the code is vertical, it's not horizontal. So if you put out an extension arm, that extension arm is attached still at the pole, potentially less than 40 inches or 48 inches to the power. So putting it out on an arm does not clear that code
I
violation.
just wanna make sure, Mr. Gibson, make sure we're clear with everything. This is a Pythagorean theorem situation where the Duke is saying they want it to be A, and you all want it to be C to measure the 48 inches. Is that, as a general matter, what we're talking about here?
Correct.
Of a right angle?
And understand, this is only a temporary solution. This is not a permanent fix. We're not asking to leave it that way. Does that make sense?
I think, no, I think I
Can Duke-
understand. I just wanna make sure I
If I
Saying
could just
it's
put a,
so the pole is replaced.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
And again, once times have lapsed, right? So if we're past
Oh,
the
after
time
the
to
time.
receive the make-ready and the permit, right, what is a next viable opportunity?
if I could put a slightly finer point on what Mr. Gibson was saying about the code requiring vertical clearance as well as horizontal clearance. That's what the code requires. Both clearances need to be met. There's a horizontal clearance that's in the code regarding communications facilities from electric facilities or all kinds of structures and facilities having safe clearance from electric facilities in the horizontal direction. That needs to be maintained as well as the vertical clearance at the pole. So we're not talking about the hypotenuse necessarily. We're talking about both clearances being maintained at the same time, is what the code says.
But again, I think what we're asking is that whenever the pole owner is not meeting the requirements, that there be viable options that meet safety codes, but allow for broadband to be delivered. Because it's not Charter Spectrum that's setting the timeline for the builds. It's literally other branches of the Commonwealth, right? That are developing the timelines which this has to be built.
So let me ask you this, are you anticipating issues with not meeting make-ready deadlines? Are you experiencing issues with not making make-ready deadlines?
We're experiencing issues.
All right, and then what is the nature of the delay? A few days? I mean, how long do these necessarily extend?
I would say, I mean, of the polls we have in the pipeline, a quarter of them have been in the pipeline greater than 12 months.
Is this, and surveys have been completed, but the work has not been completed?
Right, we have not received it back to be able to execute the work.
Well, that's not what Mr. Penny was asking.
Sorry.
He's asking, are you saying that it's been 12 months elapsed since the surveys have been completed, or time has elapsed since you sent over the original information?
Since we
period?
submitted.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so the scenario as I was contemplating is the survey has been completed, and then the utility says, you know, you've paid,
Right.
but then there is because I think that that one of the issues raised is that for pole replacement self-help, we're talking about that, the chairman brought it up, that it's when the time has passed for the make-ready work to be completed. And so I guess that's my question. Survey has been returned. You all have paid the invoice, correct? I mean, do I have the procedure correct so far?
In some cases, for sure.
Okay.
Some cases, it's from the start, we've submitted and they're over 12 months old. The impact to the Commonwealth is the same, right? So if we submit the application and they don't process it at all, it's the same result as if they do the survey and then don't move forward with the make-ready.
Well, I'm trying to contain it to the,
Okay,
to talk like why, the necessity for a temporary attachment. Obviously, I guess if a survey's not been returned, you're not gonna know whether or not you could, in a scenario where you want to propose a conditional license, go on a poll where there's no make-ready work necessary, or I guess you could do
Fair.
simple.
I see what you're saying, that's fair.
That's why I want to be clear. You're only talking about these in the context of things in which you've received a survey.
Correct.
Okay, and that was my question. It's like, how often is it where the poll owner is not meeting the deadlines after the survey has been issued to make the make-ready work? And not only how often, is there kind of a general timeline? Is it just a few days? Is it a few weeks, a few months, a year? I mean, the regulation's it's been effective for, I think, just now 2 years. It just had its 2-year birthday about a week ago. So those timelines now have kicked in, particularly with the tariffs going on file just a little, or going into effect just over a little over a year ago. So within the last year, maybe, what have you all experienced? Is it a little bit better, or is it,
I would say in general, things are getting better, sure.
yeah. All right.
That's why, just real quick, we've got this whole, but you're talking about putting things into the hopper, and what we're talking about with temporary attachment, what you guys are bringing up with temporary attachments and the conditional licenses are not pre-application delays, if you wanna call it that, but they're post-application, post-survey, post-fee paid
Correct.
timing. That's not 12 months, right?
We have some that are,
PSC jurisdictional utilities that are?
yes.
Okay. So you have some that you've paid the application and it's taken more than a year to do the complex make-ready.
To approve the permit. I don't know necessarily what the delay is.
I guess I don't have a distinction. The permit is not approved until all of the make-ready is done? I guess I'm kind of looking at the utility, so I want to have an appreciation of this, because I just was hearing a second ago that if it's tranches, then some of it has no make-ready. You can go ahead and start attaching, but do you technically get a nice little permit in the mail that says you can't attach to these 50 poles, or it's just as long as you pay for these 50 poles, we'll let you start attaching to them? Are you all seeing? Let me ask this question: is a permit? Are you all talking about permit? And I don't want to be pedantic about it, but are you all seeing that you get a permit per pole, like in terms of reality, or are you all talking about getting a permit for an application
An
to attach
application.
all the poles in there?
So they, as was mentioned earlier, they break the poles into sections, the application into sections.
Okay.
So in some cases, we get the sections back, and in some cases, we get the entire application approved, but generally, it's in sections.
I guess I'm trying to think of the best way to think about it in this. Do you get a permit per pole? Like, are you permitted to attach to that pole, or are you permitted to attach to these poles?
Typically, you get a batch, a sort of
Okay.
section-based batch of polls. These
Okay.
are released.
Okay. And what you guys are talking about are the self-help remedies you would like to engage in pre-permit, post-survey, post-payment.
Correct.
That's all. And there is no there is no self-help for any of the people we don't regulate, is there? Like, if this is like Mr. Perry's members in the South, or any of the municipals that have poles, you just can't attach until they tell you can attach.
That's my understanding.
And if I could just add a little context. So what we have generally seen in trying to balance out the number of polls that attachers may believe are in a backlog status and those that we believe are in the backlog status has a lot to do with what constitutes a completed application. And I think both of you just just mentioned the payment issue. That's part of a completed application. And what we saw prior to the first informal conference was that our attachers were in arrears, the total, all attachers altogether, were in arrears at a cost of roughly $75 a pole, about $624,000. And so they had started the clock ticking on those, and we hadn't. So there's a discrepancy here on how old some of these applications are.
No, I think we understand that. I think we're clear that the 12 months is from the time that you all sent the information over as opposed to when it was even looked at the first time, when it was paid for, when the stuff, I think we're on the same page about that. We just wanted to make sure, I think Mr. Penny wanted to make sure that when we talk about what the proposed alternatives and the information ahead of this meeting were sent over, it's envisioned that those would not be available until a certain time period, but I think we're all on the same page about that. Is that?
Correct.
Okay, we'll get to payment issues in a little bit, but that's okay. You're allowed to talk about it. I wasn't.
Well, it was raised in that context. I
Yeah.
just wanted to make
No,
sure we're clear,
it's,
so thank you.
it's hard to segregate these issues. So just, I want to talk about, or want to ask about, you know, the types of self-help remedies, temporary attachments, conditional license, self-help, complex make-ready work, like that. But I want to pull out just the temporary attachments, whether it's within the 4 inches or whether it's in the, it's the arm that goes out. And now we have to talk about geometry, but, let me ask you, take a step back. Have you worked in other states on issues like this?
No.
Okay, so this is just Kentucky. Are you familiar, though, with practices in other states that allow temporary attachments, like the truss that goes out, or working within, within the common space, but putting in a facility within less than 1 foot from the other?
Yes.
Okay. And in those, are there time limits to how long that those attachments can be there? Are they there until the pole's replaced or the other make-ready work is finished?
They're there, they would be there until the power make ready is completed, so in this case, the pole being replaced.
Okay. And so I didn't know if it was a scenario where the utility says, we're going to replace it in 30 days. We'll replace the pole in 30 days. And so that there is a finite limit to the conditional attachment, whether it's the truss or in the comm space, when it's bunched together, where the risk, the violation that nobody wants to admit to, of NESE. Just
Fair enough.
yeah, fair. But I mean, no, I understand where you're coming from. But it's the risk is limited in duration.
Correct.
Yeah, I just didn't know if this is one of the things, or it's like, oh, we have a right. They haven't done the make-ready work yet. We're going to go, put the truss out there, put our attachment where we want to, within the comm space, and then it's going to be like that. And then it could be caused, I think Ms. Ellis talked about the climbing issues, if it's a temporary attachment, or just, the NESC violations. I assume that they have a good reason for wanting to have telecom, or, attachments in the telecom area being 12 inches apart minimum. Are risk minimized the less time that they're there. That's what I was getting at. Do you know?
In other states, I don't know what those timelines are, but I think that is an important point, right? We want this to be a temporary solution.
Okay. All right.
If I could just add to that real quickly, sir. We're talking a lot about the clearance. The reason that we need clearance, right, is the pole's not tall enough, right? It's also likely, if it's a smaller pole, not strong enough. Temporary attachment or not, you're not doing a pole loading analysis or any engineering to make sure that the pole you're hanging that on is going to be structurally sound.
Okay.
So we're skipping over that component and not taking that into consideration. The clearance is important, particularly in the power space, where it's going to create, in our view, a safety concern. but I don't want to minimize either the reliability issue that could be caused by this. Temporary or not temporary, it's there. And if the structure is not built for that load, it could be a problem.
I guess, and for me, with a temporary attachment on a pole, I would assume that that there was adequate space, either things just need to be moved versus needing a new pole. But I understand, you know, if the complex make-ready work comes back and it says, we're gonna need to put a new pole in, I don't think that it would be reasonable to allow an additional load to be put on that, but then you could get into the double wood situation until a pole's put on there. That's where I was coming from when I was asking these questions, and now we're getting into, we've had geometry and engineering. Two things that which I know very little. So, all right. Any other comments they want on temporary attachments, conditional, because are conditional licenses and temporary attachments essentially the same thing? Are we talking about the same phrase? Because I think
I think
you
so.
KBCA used conditional license, and I believe LG and KU talked about temporary attachments. So that, for the sake of simplicity, those are the same things.
Right.
All right.
Can I ask
Yeah.
So the reason I asked earlier about is all complex make ready exactly the same thing, or is it all equal, or, you know, just each thing that would lead to something being complex make ready being the equivalent? Are there items or are there issues that would necessitate complex make ready, but otherwise would not, but that allowing for temporary, permanent, whatever, allowing for attachment would not cause a violation of the NESC? Or are we effectively saying, because here's why I ask. Because we know, we've all agreed, I think, that some of the utilities have internal procedures or internal standards that exceed the NESC. Kentucky Power, great example, craziest thing, one side of the Big Sandy in Virginia, heavy loading standards, NESC says the other side in Kentucky, technically medium loading, right? Internally, they're doing now their operations to heavy loading for the Kentucky. So, you know, a complex make ready in certain places in Kentucky Power's territory is pole replacement is necessitated by internal procedures to make the pole heavy loading, but it would not be a violation to attach an additional line as long as it continued, or an additional attachment, because it may continue to allow for, you could do it and not exceed minimum or medium loading, right? Like that's the possible fact pattern. Maybe they wouldn't want to do it, that's fine. Maybe they would provide a waiver of it, that's whatever. But are we saying as a general matter, complex make ready is, as a general proposition, synonymous with an attachment on this pole would violate the NESC? I mean, at least with the co-ops, is that what the
As a
line
general
that we're
matter, I would
drawing?
say, yeah, as a general matter, I would say that's right.
I would agree with that.
So it just, for, I guess for everybody's benefit, Mr. Osterloh's benefit, the attorneys in the building, just everybody needs, as great as engineers are, everybody needs attorneys. You know, one of the, I guess, issues or things to discuss if we talk about this in a subsequent meeting is the fact that our regulation specifically says, I just pulled it up, again, to be direct, that, under the electric section in our regulations, that a utility shall construct and maintain its plant facilities in accordance with good accepted engineering practices. Yeah, we didn't use GUP here, so, unless otherwise specified by the commission, the utility shall use applicable provisions in the following publications as standards of accepted good engineering practice for construction and maintenance of plant and facilities, herein incorporated by reference, and the first one is the NESC. Now, it's the version of the NESC that was in 1990, so who knows what has changed since then. But effectively, to do something like this would require action. Let's just say it that way. I'm not trying to give anybody ideas. I'm just acknowledging here that our regulations say that the utilities have to maintain it in accordance with the NESC. So if there are, the reason I raise all this is, if there are things that can be done without violating the NESC, then let's talk about those.
And
what I want
that's
to throw
what
out.
we're asking for. I don't work in the power space. I can't speak to that standard. But what we're asking for is the leeway when we don't complete the make ready in time, for to take extra measures to allow us to attach, right? I'm not saying we should violate NESC, and that's not our goal, to even ask for that. But the remedy really is to complete the make ready within the timeline, right?
Yeah.
And then this would be completely off the
Well,
table.
I'll just speak my opinion, not that I haven't, but that this seems to be treating the symptom and not the
Agreed.
the underlying sort of cause here. So I guess I throw out there, if we're gonna put this on a subsequent agenda to have additional conversations on, because I don't wanna keep all of our time on this, but, if we're gonna have a subsequent agenda, it may be worth maybe having, interim conversations, or the folks in this room having interim conversations about if there are things that you all can think of that would allow for the accelerated provision of broadband service without violation of the NESC. That may be a worthwhile discussion, because I'll say it very bluntly, if we're expected to be the ones that come up with all of these solutions, this is an engineering issue, is what I'm trying to convey. And so if there are fact patterns that a utility could say, oh, if this is the case, we will put this in our tariff, that you can go ahead with this type of self-help remedy insofar as it does not violate the NESC, that's a great conversation to have in terms of what are those fact patterns and what are those types of actions that can be taken. But I just felt like it was important to say that the utilities aren't just under the NESC for being under it. I think we have a regulation that effectively says that they have to abide by the NESC, and that's something that would necessarily have to be addressed if something was changed. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
Okay. So, are there anything else on this topic at the time being? Realizing we could always come back to it and step into a trap and find ourselves back here, so. All right. I'd like to jump to payment issues, because I think that might relate to the timing of things. And I'm reminded, I think this morning already, we discussed how an email didn't get delivered because there was too large of an attachment to it. You know, in my practice here, I've found that has been an issue sometimes, because under law, I'm supposed to send every time we file a regulation with the LRC or proposed regulation, I have to send an email out to a whole list of people that are on Reg Watch. And about half of those will get returned unopened. Some of them will get caught up in spam filters. And so I've discharged my duty. I sent it to the email address that they said, but the people on the other end didn't receive it. So, you know, my question is, and I'll ask questions about the poll owners, and I'm realizing that John can speak only kind of generically about the RACCs, is that, first, I would step back. The question is there a problem with timely processing or of payment? One, invoices. Two, actual payment. And is there a breakdown in between?
Jeff, before we get started, can we take a few minutes? It's already been an hour and a half.
We're going to take a few minutes.
No, I don't want to get into a new discussion and folks need to step out in the middle of
That's
it.
true. Okay, how about 10 minutes or so? Does that sound good? And then we'll come back, we'll tackle this topic. Minutes left, and I want to, we've talked about temporary attachments and conditional license. We talked about the scenarios in which we think that it might be necessary, and one of which was that the application has been quote-unquote processed, a survey has come back, but the make-ready work has not been completed. So let me ask you a question without looking at the regulation. There's a payment beforehand for the survey, correct? They say we submit 999 polls. And at what point is payment sent to the poll owner?
So once we receive, and Mr. Penney, if you don't mind, could I go back just one?
Absolutely.
One quick moment. So just to kind of tie from our last conversation on the temp attachment piece before we get into the invoicing piece, is that the recommendation is not to get into the encroachment of the NASC power space at all. It is, could we temporarily attach with even kind of the arm, which is downward facing on the same side of the pole where the utilities exist, to create the 12 inches from the other communications provider, right? So I just kind of want to put a bow on kind of that piece of it before we moved on into the invoicing payment component.
So rather than, and this is the visual, let's pretend this is the communication space, and then you have 12 inches. You want to come out this way.
Correct, and the arms are facing downward on the
This way
same
too,
side.
so it wouldn't,
Correct.
okay, all right. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And-
So I don't know that we were clear necessarily in that component.
I'll bring some Lincoln Logs in next time around, so we can have some actual,
Bring a poll.
we can do some dioramas for this. Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So back to it, when is payment actually made? Initial payment? Let's talk about per poll for the survey. Is it, you submit 999 polls, I'm putting it there for the sake of ease. And do you pay at the $75 per poll or whatever the tariff rate is at that moment? You submit the application, then you submit the payment at the same time?
Once we receive the invoice, and then we will process it on our end for payment.
Okay. So, that's the thing. We were talking about the emails earlier, and then I was reminded that people are people and needed to take a break. So, that, for some reason or another, an email can go into a spam folder, or it can go, it can get bounced back, or for whatever reason. I'm going to ask the individual poll owners this to the extent, how are invoices sent? Is it the system, is it the Catapult with the K system that, the charters of the world have to every day log in to see if they got a notification? Or does, whoever submits the application, they also include an email address, and then they would get an email saying, here's your invoice? Or how does it work?
Yeah, great question. So, excuse me, we do provide the notification via Catapult. Excuse me. So, the thing that I think has caused some confusion is prior to the last rulemaking proceeding, that invoice was available immediately upon submission. There's now a short, I'll call it, generally speaking, 1 to 2 day period between the submission and when the invoice is ready. And the reason for that is the latest reg requires us to track the cost at the individual application level to true those up. And so there is a period in there where we tie that individual application to our internal financial system for tracking purposes. And then I was way down in the weeds. You're looking at me like I've got three
Geometry,
heads.
engineering, and now finance.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm not good at any of the three, so. So that invoice is then sent via Catapult, or is available in Catapult when the attacher goes and looks at that application. There's literally just a big button there they press and it says invoice, and the invoice is there and available, and they can print it out, process it, do whatever it is they want to do with it.
Okay, so you say, 1 to 2 day lag or whatever. Is it incumbent upon the applicant to just keep on checking back?
I'm gonna ask John, is there a notification that's sent? I
There
believe
is,
there
yes.
is, right?
Every time
Yeah.
the status changes within Catapult, it generates a notification to not only the poll owner and everyone that the poll owner has shared the application with, but the applicant as well. So,
By desktop app, by email?
oh, via email, I'm sorry, yes.
Okay.
Let me, can I ask a quick question? Practical implication of sending notifications. Pick a contractor. Who's the biggest, who are we talking about in terms of contractors? Just pick one.
I'm sorry.
Just pick,
Commissioner
okay, contractor ABC. Okay, that works for you all. That are getting all these notifications, people you want to share the application with, right? They get a notification every time. What are we talking with a single application? How many notifications are we talking about? But you said every single change or every update to the situation. Are we talking like, an application of 100 polls? Are we talking about 50 notifications throughout the application and survey process? Are we talking,
It could be
hey,
that
your
many.
bill's ready, hey, the survey's done, and that's it? I'm just
No, sorry,
magnitude here.
so there's a notification that's generated at each step. So it's, from the time that the application is submitted all the way through approval for installation, which is the, quote-unquote permit stage, through the post-construction inspection process, and ultimately the application complete status. So there could be, 50 is not, I don't think that's an unreasonable number, or too far afield in terms of what the actual number of notifications per application might be.
Okay, and how many applications do you guys get in a year? Well, or maybe I asked Charter, how many applications are you all given to LG and EKU in a year?
I'd have to go back and get that number.
Like, is that gonna be like 3, or is that gonna be like 103?
103.
Okay.
Times
It's gonna be more than that.
And that's what I'm trying to have an
Yeah.
appreciation for, is like, we are likely talking across a single attacher for possibly, especially for KU, given the breadth of the size. We're talking about thousands of notifications related to all of the related applications. And you know that they're related to each application by what? Just it references an application number in each one of those?
That's right, yes.
So if you have 100 applications out, you would have to cross-reference each time you got a notification, which application they're even talking about, saying it's paid or not paid. And that's what you guys, similar situation, you guys have a notification email that goes, okay. I'm sorry, can I ask real quick, do you have like a single email address this is all going to, or is this like, you have 100 people employed and you're uploading multiple, so like the same, like the team on that application are all getting these notification emails at any time? I don't know how it works.
Is it one email or a mailbox that people check?
Typically, it's a DL, a distribution list, because we have multiple employees that handle applications in different parts of the state.
Ms. Ellis has been leaning uncomfortably. Do you want to speak?
I was just waiting to talk about invoicing, because since ours is different.
You're welcome also to take the microphone back with you if you don't want to say. You can do however.
I like hanging out here.
Okay, that's fine. All right, so I guess the thing is, so you're saying that every time that there's a change, there's a generated notice. And I know we are getting way down into the details, but, timing is important in these issues. And until payment is made, I guess an application is not deemed complete. Correct? Okay. All right. And so, luckily I have my computer here, but if I'm gone from my computer for more than an hour or two, I'll go back upstairs and I'll get several dozen emails, and you'll have to work your way through it. Not all of the time do I know what the content of the email is, even by the subject headline. So, with regard to the notices, if you know, and I'm pointing at you because you're at the bench, but all you all, is there a subject saying invoice? Do you know? Because that's a critical timing issue versus, oh, here's been a change, here's a change that may be immaterial to how, LG and KU are reporting it to the person who's made the application, here's a change to this. Could be immaterial, doesn't require any action by the applicant, but the payment of the invoice does. And so is there anything that segregates, here's a notification, it's time to pay, that would alert somebody checking these things to it? Do you know?
So it doesn't, excuse me, the email notification from Catapult doesn't use those words, but each notification's, the subject body of each email notification references the status change that it relates to.
Okay, that's what I was saying.
Yes.
All right, that's what I was wondering. So somebody could look at the body of the email, or even just the subject line. said.
Yes.
I don't, the PSC, I'm not speaking for the PSC, but as commission staff, having been here for almost a quarter century, is not interested in that level of regulation for it, but I had to get down to those questions. I know some people who might be practitioners before the commission don't believe it when I said that, but nonetheless. Ms. Ellis, how is your all's invoice system?
So we don't invoice at the beginning of the proposal as LG&E KU does. They require a payment for the start of engineering. We bill for the engineering after the fact with the understanding that it will be paid even if you decide not to go forward. The first time that the attacher would get an invoice from us would be an estimate letter for what the construction is going to cost. And that usually goes, it's a letter that says, here's the estimate of what it's gonna cost, and that is sent via email unless they request it to be sent snail mail. Typically, most of our attachers have a mailbox. A lot of them do, at least. We also have a joint use mailbox, pole attachment mailbox. But that invoice, we send the letter. A lot will pay off of that letter unless they request an actual invoice up front. Then we will email the invoice and they can pay it directly. But it would be, again, probably from the time of the estimate letter to the invoice would be a couple of days, and it is email.
So there's not an upfront per poll, if somebody submits 50 polls and it's,
Somebody submits 50 polls, we go and engineer, because when you submit based on our tariff and the understanding relationship that we have with the attachers, you submit with the understanding that we're going to go do the engineering and you're going to pay for that engineering on the tail end.
okay, so any survey fees are also included in that invoice?
That is the survey, yes. That invoice is for engineering, and we typically bill the engineering out monthly to every 2 months, depending on the timing of when the work happens.
Okay.
But the make-ready construction work would happen when the estimate, that invoicing would be when the estimate is ready. We've said, hey, we've finished the engineering. This is the work that has to happen before you can attach. You have to pay this before we move forward.
Okay. All right.
Duke Energy's process is very similar to that, with the exception we put our invoicing or our estimates into SPANS, which is our notification system.
But you don't require the estimate to be paid before doing the work?
Before doing the make ready?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I'm sorry, before doing the engineering.
We don't require the engineering upfront, no. Make ready, we do.
Payment for engineering.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
I would just say the cooperative is very similar to that. Engineering gets started before you get payment, but the construction typically doesn't start until that make-ready estimate has been approved.
So speaking to the largest attacher in the room, have you had problems with notification for receiving, invoices, payments, and like that? And not to say there's any blame to go around, but if you could point to one of the issues or problems, is it internal, external, or a little bit of both?
It's honestly a little bit of both, right? So we can be our own bottleneck from a processing perspective, and some of that is driven by just the variety of platforms, right? Some require electronic, some refuse electronic. They require written, like mailed check, right? And so how that all processes within our systems, right? As well as just that kind of seek and find is kind of how we've coined it, of finding those invoices, attaching them to those permits, and then getting them flushed through our system. So since we last met, we've kind of worked operationally to say, how do we get out of that? How can you push us those actual invoices, not just the notifications, right? Creating even an enhanced kind of broader distribution list that Tracy alluded to, and then ensuring we've got any backlog rectified immediately, but then on a go forward. I know we mentioned even last time that potentiality of some type of like escrow or account that you would draw from. What we want to look for before we get to that phase is we'd have to have a reconciliation process in play that kind of eradicates some of the noise that's out there today to be able to kind of put that up front and then account for it on the back end.
me ask a quick question. Some of the co-ops have weekly meetings or, I think that with some of the projects, do you all have weekly meetings with individual projects or any individual attachers or recurring periodic meetings?
Yeah, individual meetings usually related to the project, and, one of the topics last time in the informal conference here was related to the communication and improving that communication. And from an operational standpoint, we're having bi-weekly meetings now, with charter, and I think that's what Ms. Day was just alluding to a little bit here, was we've been working out some of these payment and processing problems on both sides.
Yeah, I just didn't know, like, when you have especially, maybe this is more relevant to the co-ops, but when you have a specific, you're only serving 3 counties or 5 counties or 7 counties, and you got 1 or 2 maybe distinct projects going on at any given time. If you're having weekly or bi-weekly meetings, as the whole owner, are you able to query the outstanding invoices that entity may have and bring it to that meeting and talk about it so that at least keeping it does that happen today?
So the short answer is yes, and that, I would say that's why the payment issues have improved over the last year. And I hate to give Tracy any credit, but they have worked to resolve those, when we have identified them specifically.
And that's the process we're going through right now, the exact same thing, and cleaning up that backlog.
Because it's sort of like, it sounds like, not purposely out of sight, out of mind, but if you're not actively looking for or getting the notifications, or they're going somewhere you're not, you see it once and then you forget you saw it, whatever it may be, and then you otherwise have to go search and seek and then look and then figure out which number relates to which project. It just seems like bringing it as a process, bringing it more publicly, saying, hey, remember we've got 7 outstanding invoices, or that kind of thing. It seems like it may alleviate some of these issues. Okay. Just real quick, just talking about invoices, how far, for the utilities that that require an estimate of cost, are you all any good at it? I don't want to, how far off from final invoice versus estimate are we? I guess for the people paying it and for the people charging it, are you all getting iteratively, or you all feel like you're getting closer, or is it way off? I'm just curious how that looks with estimates versus actual cost.
Yeah, it's still a relatively immature process, and so we're still learning and working on that. I don't have the answer directly to your question of exactly how much we're off by, but I can look into it.
Do you all feel like you're
follow up.
overcharging or undercharging relative to the estimate?
Under,
The estimate is not high enough?
correct.
Okay.
And is the true up, I guess the true up has to be after the fact, right? Once you've done that. And so, it's still pretty early on in the process in terms of the regulation and the
Yes.
true ups and everything like that. But any problem collecting?
No, nothing outside of what we've already talked about,
Right.
yeah.
Well, and then so when you were talking that there was, I can't remember, you said outstanding invoices. Are those the invoices which you're speaking, are they the true ups or are they the initial?
They're the initial application prepayment.
Okay, all right.
So can I just, find our point on ability to recover? Are you all charging any off or any of it uncollectible? Are you all having people show up to be attachers? Charter's still here. They're still, I think we'd know if they were no longer in business. But with anybody else, have you all done work for people and then they disappear and you're not able to run them down, or is this?
Not
You all
to
getting
that,
paid, are these people there and getting paid for it? I don't know, maybe the same question with co-ops, but.
Yeah, I would say, 6 months ago, we might have had a different answer. Like I said, the payment issues have improved, in recent months.
However, there have been different companies in the past that were smaller companies that have gone out of business or changed ownership over time, and that has been difficult at times to recover either attachments and or costs or things like that, or even find him to talk about audits and unauthorized attachments. So, some of the smaller companies, that's been historical in some of our rural territories.
Yeah, and I don't think that we have not written off large amounts of it, to the best of my knowledge, but it has been a topic of conversation internally because of the age of some of the debt and whether or not it should be written off as bad debt, but that would expose us to recovering that, from our ratepayers, which we don't want to do that. We don't want to go that route.
Yeah, no, that's why I asked the
Yeah,
question.
so-
Probably a legal question, Ms. Judd, you don't have to jump up. But hypothetically, would a utility be within its right to withhold processing any other applications if, like, say, a true-up wasn't paid? Utility submits an application, the first application is accepted, they pay the thing, but and then it comes time, everybody's attached, it comes time for the true-up, LG&E and KU have underestimated, then that attacher doesn't pay, and then they come in another time, they're like, hey, we want to pay. We want another project. Is there anything within LG&E and KU that says, wait a minute, we can't process this because prior indebtedness?
Our policy does not do that.
Okay.
To the best of my knowledge, I don't believe that my understanding of the regulation does not provide for that either. We
Okay.
only hold up the application that hasn't been paid for. If you haven't paid for it, we don't process it.
Sorry, Ms. Judd, I didn't want to.
You're asking him for legal conclusion?
No. I was trying to ask it in such a way that we wasn't getting to it there. I just didn't know.
And I tried to word it
Let's
as
put it
my
this way. I wasn't
understanding.
asking you if the regulation of the law allowed it. I was just asking you if that's something that.
We
the
do not have that
utility- okay.
policy.
All right, that was my take on things. Okay. What about any of the other utilities that considered that? Well, you're all are after the fact. You all, meaning Kentucky Power, sorry for the record, are after the fact. So, yeah, okay.
But after the fact, on the true-up, if we got a large outstanding balance from multiple invoices, we would notice a default, and then part of that remedy would be we would not process any more applications until they caught up.
Okay.
But it would have to be significant, it would have to be a continual not paying.
Right, and then I guess you could get into issues of further on of the attacher not paying rent and then the like of that. Okay. All right.
And I would say that, the process typically for the co-ops is that the payment issue is upfront, right? It's, here's the make-ready cost, we're not gonna take action until you pay the make-ready cost. So I'm not aware of true-up issues.
Okay, all right. And I may be borrowing trouble by asking some of these questions. It may not necessarily be the biggest issues out there, but I just, with the increase in deployment and attachers, some of these issues might raise their head, and I'm sure that you will pay. We're talking about those that aren't here to speak for themselves. And I lost my train of thought by trying to be cute.
It's a story as old as time.
Yes, I know. Thank you. Like I said, quarter century is starting to get a little bit old. And so, see what the processing. I mean, I guess is that, broadly speaking, has there just been improvement in communication since the first meeting we had a little bit ago? I mean,
Absolutely.
Was it beneficial to come together and to discuss some of these issues?
Yes.
All right, so.
I would say that broadly speaking, we've been addressing a number of the things that have been discussed here today or that were discussed in the last conference. And I think there are solutions on the horizon.
Okay, all right. Because it kind of segue into the next, we have about 25 minutes, and hopefully I'll just hit on one more topic, then we can save some for later. We'll definitely talk about large volume applications at the next meeting, because I know that's a big one for charter, and by that time, maybe the commission will have completed its review and decided how to dispose of the large volume.
Don't be writing checks.
Maybe,
you can't cash.
may have.
It's not that slippery.
I speak conditionally, of course, and that way the commission, we might at that time actually have an exhibit at which to take a look to see if, how to address these things. But what I'd like to talk about, and I think I asked this question before, but interpretation of rules. Has there been any issues with somebody, there's been with a disagreement, the fundamental disagreement over the language of the regulation? Where a utility's read it one way and an attacher has read it another?
I can't think of any specific examples.
I don't have any, so.
Okay.
I mean, because,
So let's just speak, I'll speak of this. So this is an informal conference. We can't, it's not a record. It's not a declaratory order. It's not in front of the commission. It's like, you're not gonna say anything and then see an order that says the commission being sufficiently advised based off of what we heard the other day. So we're just curious about actual disagreements that have occurred. So that we have an appreciation whether there are disagreements about what the regulations say, or if there's just wishes or hopes or expectations that the regulations would say different things. That's a real distinction, I think, because we've already had this whole fight about what the regulations should actually say. Then we had another, we'll call it fight, but a disagreement about how to put what the regulations say into tariffs and whether the tariffs comply with that. That's a whole nother thing. We're not really talking about tariffs necessarily, but just whether there have been discussions and on what particular issues they are. So,
I will say there are some interpretation issues. When we start the clock on a submission versus when the poll owners start the clock. We've talked about that one in detail, and that's a big issue, right? Because they start at payment, we start when we submit it. Those kind of issues, sets some issues around interpretation of self-help, and how that's defined and what that requires.
when you say requires, you mean prerequisites to availing yourself to self-help?
Exactly.
Or even, I think, the suggestion of using like a joint use contractor versus providing that approved contractor list, right? So that we could take advantage of that, again, in a joint approach.
And that's the distinction that Kentucky Power was making. You're saying that difference of.
Correct.
Okay.
I guess, my question would go towards when I'm asking about disagreement, not disagreement, but, different interpretations, the regs or rules, is that, to the extent there's vagueness, that's something that the commission could potentially, through the thorny and uncomfortable process of amending a regulation, address if it is a significant issue, versus something that after time and practice kind of works its way out where an accepted interpretation comes about in just practical terms. So that's where I was coming from with the question. I'm not suggesting the commission will make any amendments or anything.
And we typically work through most of the issues with communication, but in general, there are some differences of opinion of what the rules really are.
Okay. All right, may come back to that, and I might ask for kind of a little more specifics on that.
Some examples of
And one of the biggest then is obviously when the clock starts, right?
So clock meaning, which clock?
On a joint use permit, but whether you're talking, there's several clocks obvious in the process. When the engineering's got to start, as you've heard today, when the make ready will start being processed, that kind of stuff. Even to the point of when a check is deemed received.
Okay, all right. Does anybody take PayPal? It's just,
What's not, is it a physical check? It's not an ACH transaction?
I'm sorry?
Is it a physical check that gets cut?
In most cases, yeah, we FedEx them.
Really?
And we use the tracking number as proof of payment.
Okay.
And they vary.
Can we start there?
Can
in
we
terms of
start-
solutions?
And I think that's the piece, right? Mr.
I don't
Bishop?
want to undermine FedEx's earnings because it sounds like you all may be keeping them afloat, given the number of applications you all have any given year. But that seems like maybe something we can address. Okay.
Yeah.
let's say I'm a KU customer, I can pay online. But not to point anybody out, I just, not experienced with the other utilities. But anyway, that's just, I mean, that is an example of
It
something
is a
that,
variety,
Yeah,
right?
it
And
is.
that's the complication and the bottleneck component as well.
okay. And then from the utilities perspective, you know, any issue with receiving payment, but it's, you know, return for, you know, not sufficient funds or anything like that? Any bounce checks?
No,
Okay.
not seen that.
If they can afford to send it FedEx, they can afford to, they have enough money in their bank account. Okay.
Well, if it could be an ACH transaction, you'd get it immediately.
Right.
It's just, I don't
And that
know
would
if
be a
this,
preferred mechanism,
yeah,
Yep.
honestly,
I
Commissioner.
don't know if systems can do that, but
KU accepts ACH.
And some do, some don't, so I
Okay.
think that's just, you know, a good component.
I think from our perspective, the biggest confusion is when the attacher tries to pay 4 or 5 different invoices in one check or one payment, and we don't have which invoices they were meaning to pay.
okay.
I would like to just say that the part of the process that I was kind of digging into earlier that causes that 1 or 2 day delay in the invoice not being immediately available, that's the exact reason. We've created a process by which that invoice gets tied to the application.
Okay.
And so the exact problem that you're talking about, we are remedying with that 1 to 2 days to process that invoice rather than making it immediately available.
But I mean, this is a problem in business, like, across, well, I say across the world, most places probably don't write, yet write checks or still write checks, depending on which country, but having 3 outstanding bills and just writing a check with nothing in the memo or nothing attached to it for a random, what otherwise would seem to be a random amount with multiple outstanding invoices, that's not unique to this
Right.
situation, but I could understand that if you have 100 outstanding invoices and it's for, you know, 4.17, you know, $2,434.29, you're gonna go through all 100 invoices and try to calculate what combination of those invoices equals that amount would be.
And that,
Understandably
the
complicated.
matching it up takes time, which could delay saying, yes, we've received payment, because it's being held in a suspense account until we can figure out which invoice it need to be applied to.
So let me just ask a quick question. Who, from the poll owner side, who wants checks? Does anybody have a preference for checks?
No.
From a attacher side, do you all have a preference for checks?
No.
No.
But we have this issue with ACH.
What are we
You
doing
have the
here?
same issue
We have
because
the
you
same
can't type
issue with
it.
an ACH though,
Yeah,
because that's what we'll
there's no
get.
memo.
And when it comes in electronically, you only get so much.
There's a limited amount of information.
There's a
allowed to
limited
go
amount
on
of
with it, yeah.
information. So, I mean, we've asked several attachers, could you, when you make the payment, tell us what you're paying? Send me an email back saying, we sent you an amount and this is what it's covering, but we don't always get that
Okay. Well, this seems to be, again, something that
communication.
we definitely, this is not gonna,
And that exact reason is one of the reasons we haven't truly moved to an ACH, because it requires other back channel communications to make it all work, right? So with the check, at least we can track, we can see that it was cashed, we can see that
Yeah.
it was received.
this seems to also unnecessarily cause the issue that Mr. Penny was asking about a second ago, asking Ms. Judd about whether, you know, not even withholding of payment for a particular item holds up other applications, but if the poll attacher doesn't know what ACH or check received pays for which invoices, it doesn't know which invoices to apply or process or start working on, especially when it's the initial payment or even the subsequent payment, that you don't know to release a permit or to start the engineering, if you don't know what check you got was supposed to pay for which invoice, and the attacher may have been trying to purposefully prioritize the number of applications they have by paying you for certain specific ones, but because they didn't tell you, you guys are guessing and just applying it against the outstanding owed and just maybe applying the next applicant. That this seems like something we could, it's gonna be utility to utility, but this seems like with communication, that would what I'm trying to say is that should be able to, I'm trying to be very polite these days. This seems like something that you all should be able to fix without necessarily detailed involvement of the Public Service Commission. Anybody necessarily, does anybody go, no, we're having recurring problems, we need the PSC to intervene on this issue? Okay. Okay. Is that a lessons, has it gotten better with lessons learned, or is this one of these things that's like outstanding and we just haven't gotten to it yet because it's not the biggest issue?
LG&E and KU's experience was that we saw the circumstance that was in your illustration pretty frequently toward the outset of some of our process changes, and now we see it not very regularly at all. Zero
You
times
could-
in the last year, I'd say, with
Okay.
our largest attacher.
I'd say the same. Again, it feels a little chaotic and it's not as automated as it should be, but it's gotten better as we've gotten more practice at doing this work together.
Okay. Does the greater involvement between institutions help? Like, you know, you have a vendor that you rarely use, there's going to be issues there. If you have a vendor that you routinely use, usually people find a way to make it work more frictionless. Is that effectively what's happening? Is I know they're a routine customer, but I mean, at the beginning you have growing pains, and then you get used to sending money back and forth. Okay, real quick, just on this issue, if a person overpays, right, like these true ups or whatever it may be, maybe you're underestimating now because maybe costs are rising faster than you're accounting for them, but then costs start slowing down and you're overcharging people the true up. If it's a credit, if they've overpaid, do you all pay them back, or do you, like with a charter, to go, hey, we're gonna see you 4 more times this month, we'll hold it over as a credit. Do you all try to send it back so that you keep it invoice to invoice? That's a question for everybody, but.
I would say that, you know, it varies a lot from one cooperative to the next, how their accounting department first handle it.
Okay.
From our perspective, we've seen both. Where they keep the credit and sometimes they return.
Okay. Preferences? Anybody have preferences?
For us, it's easier if they keep it, right? It eliminates that whole upfront payment thing, right?
Cash flow's good.
Yeah.
Nobody complains about positive cash flow. Okay.
I guess one more, question about the details of the submission of projects and everything. With charter, because you all are going to be certainly, I think, the largest attacher in the state now and going forward, that is the application always going to be in charter's name, or is it going to be engineering firm X has submitted the application? Is there anything, and so they're the ones that would be responsible for getting the notice for the invoice, or is it always going to be in charter / Spectrum?
Unless there's an exception, I don't know, but it's always in Spectrum.
Okay, all right, 'cause that was something that clicked in my head. If there's an issue with notification, and it's one thing, you start to develop a relationship working with each other. You know whom to call and like that, but if a subsidiary is going to be making this application, so another person's responsible for it versus, but that doesn't seem like to be the
I
case.
don't think so.
Okay. All right. Well, do we have any other?
I think there are a lot of issues to go through.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things is, from what I understand, we're farther along than many states, so I think we're working these things out, and other states will be calling for help, so.
Well, I like Commissioner Regan's optimism, so we're working through that. Chairman, do you have any other questions or comments?
I don't think so. I do think that what may be helpful in subsequent meetings, especially as it relates to charter, but even if there are other attachers that would like to speak to this, if we need to be thinking about these issues, making a distinction between funding mechanisms or reimbursement mechanisms, does it matter if it's an RDOF project? Does it matter if it's an agreement with, like, the Scott County, where it's a contractual? You all have a relationship with a Scott County or Bourbon County, whoever it is, for some of these early counties, or if it's a separate state program. does that matter in terms of your all's timing, your all's requirements, the amount of documentation you get, whatever it may be? Because it seems like we're talking about lessons learned, but what we have lessons learned are for a very specific, narrow set of types of projects, or at least I'll call them funding mechanisms. I don't know how you all think about them, but whether that matters for attachers of what their projects are related to for all of these processes. So like, maybe we fix this as it relates to the Scott County situation, and then we get into RDOF projects across the state, and there's a whole different level of requirements from the attacher, and it requires pole owners to do things differently, or different expectations or different timing. I throw that out there, not necessarily for this meeting, but if there are distinctions as the way you all account for them or think about them or the timing or whatever they are, that may be helpful going forward, so that we're not fixing a problem. We're not fixing problems that we won't see again, and we're missing problems that we are going to run into.
And so, commission staff we have a meeting already scheduled for March 1st. Same time, and our roof might be finished by then. And I think the order setting that out, establish deadlines for when there'd be filing of issues, and when the commission would issue an agenda with those topics to be discussed. Hopefully there are no objections to that, because I think it worked well with this, but also with the 3-week turnaround, we can still have we can keep these issues a little fresher in our mind, and then we'll see where we go from there to see if there's any other meetings. Does anybody have any other issues, or, I mean, you have?
On that, can I, just one thing, does anybody have a problem with the way we've been doing the process and setting the meetings up, or actually having the meetings? The split virtual in person, the setting of the agenda, the requesting of the topics, the amount of time available to do all of those things? Does anybody have questions or concerns or input or feedback? Online or in person? We're just gonna, I mean, of course, we fixed the roll call, because that was apparent. You live and you learn. I would have done it the exact same way, but unless we get feedback, we're gonna assume this is, successful is probably the wrong word, but that this process is fine for everybody. So unless you all tell us different, this is the process we're gonna continue to follow until we feel like it's not working well. So does anybody have any comments or concerns?
Or if there are issues you want addressed in the next meeting, you can just email.
All right. Well, said I don't have gavel powers, but this conference, so we'll just go ahead and draw to a close. I'll issue a memo into the record that basically will tell us, to the best of my knowledge, who was here, either online or in person. I think everybody has sent me an email. Mr. Osterloh sent me an updated list of people while we were sitting here, and I appreciate your attention to that particular detail. That being said, go forth.
Thank you.
See y'all.
Thank you.